Howdy and welcome to the definitive guide on running Strapi, the headless open source content management system on Google Cloud Platform. I'm Kevin Blanco, a senior developer relations advocate, and also I'm honored to be recognized as a Google developer expert in Google Cloud Platform. So I'm going to be your trusty guide to correctly orchestrate and self-host Strapi on Google Cloud Platform. If you have struggled with incomplete tutorials or documentation in the past like I did, don't worry, this video aims to provide you with a comprehensive step-by-step guide, sharing insights and best practices based on my real-world experience as a certified Google Cloud architect and Google developer expert who have run several production Strapi workloads. This is actually part 1 of 3 video series. The first one will be explaining everything to configure Google Cloud, APIs, services, databases, storage, and credentials to correctly run Strapi. The second video will go over the Strapi app itself, creating the application configuration, environment variables, and much more. And the third video is how to configure Google Cloud Build to create automated delivery pipelines for continuous integration and continuous delivery of our application from a GitHub repository. Also, there is a secret gift at the end. If you want to use Terraform, I'm going to be sharing a Terraform file that set up everything I'm going to explain in a simple command. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Before we actually do anything, let's review the architecture diagram so we understand what we're going to be building. The first thing is Strapi is going to be running on Google Cloud App Engine, which is a managed service. Zero server, is completely serverless, and it's going to be connected to a database. That database is going to run on Cloud SQL using Postgres 15. And as usual, as any architecture, it's going to have like a replica set and failover recovery, etc. Also, it's going to be storing all of the files in the CMS on a Google Cloud storage bucket. Images, PDF, videos, whatever we set up to upload to Strapi, that's going to be stored on the cloud storage files. Now, where the code is going to come from is going to come from a repository on GitHub. And using Google Cloud Build is going to be deployed to that Strapi CMS instance on App Engine. And also all of this is going to be completely logged into the stack logging stack driver to define, for example, monitoring and alerts. In case you have downtime in your App Engine, for example, you can define alerts to log tracking, to be able to log everything that is going on in our cloud builds, in our application, to trace errors, for example. And that's for the other thing we're going to be setting up error trace to be able to trace down errors on any of those architectural elements. Now the load balancer is optional because since App Engine is a managed server that is scaled up and down depending on traffic, you might not need a load balancer, but if you want to, we can also define a load balancer in front of our application to manage the traffic load. So that's it. Also, if you don't want to do everything I'm going to explain to you in detail because you probably know about it, you can use Terraform. Visit the repository of the code base sample that we're going to go through, and you will find a Terraform file that has everything I'm going to explain to you: the cloud build, the database, the cloud storage, the App Engine. Everything I just explained is going to be there, and it's going to ask you for your project ID, for your database password that you want to use, which VPC are you going to use. All you have to do is define your service account file that has access to your Google Cloud project, and everything should scaffold for you. But if you are more a type of person that needs to understand step by step, that's exactly what I'm going to show you right now. Alright, here we are in Google Cloud Platform, and the first thing you're going to need is a project with billing enabled. But also remember that Google gives a $300 credit for new Google Cloud accounts, and everything I'm going to show you right now fits under that $300 free credit. So that's great. The second thing we're going to need is the G-Cloud command line interface to execute some commands. Now you can install that in your machine, but also Google has something called Cloud Shell, which you can enable here on the top on the browser, and that is going to display the command line interface at the bottom of your browser. Here we can execute the same commands that we can execute also in our terminal, and it's going to happen right on the browser, which is great because we don't need to install anything. Now let's enable some APIs. Turns out that we need to enable this for our project to work correctly because, for example, our project is going to be saving data in Google Cloud SQL, storing files in the bucket, and in order to do that, we need those APIs to be enabled. Now, the way we do that is, we have one of two ways. The first one is do it manually for each of the APIs by finding the API here on the top. So, for example, we can find the secret manager API, which is the first one we're going to be enabling, and we can find it, click it, and then enable it. So here it is in the marketplace, and when you find it, you're going to see a button here, a blue button that says enable. For me, it's already enabled, but you will see that button, so you click it and it's enabled. But doing that one by one can be, it can take time. So let's do it directly on the command line interface. The way you do that is you type gcloud services enable, and then the name of the service you want to enable. In this case, secretmanager.googleapis.com. And that's the way you do it for all of the different services you want to enable. So we're going to enable quite a few. Remember, there is a supporting blog article that has all of the commands that are going to be running and is in the link in the description. So make sure to have that open in another tab because we're going to be referencing those commands very often. So we're going to do that for all of those. And so I'm going to speed up this process because it's quite simple to do. All right, there you go. We just enabled all of them. Very simple in the command line interface. So our project is ready in terms of APIs. Now we also need to set up some permissions because it turns out we're going to be using App Engine. So App Engine is a managed hosting application service that runs on Google Cloud. And that specific service is going to be using something called service account. Now a service account is a special kind of account typically used by an application or a compute workload rather than a person. And that service account is identified by an email address which is unique to that account. So applications uses these services to connect to other services. So for example, App Engine is going to be connecting to Cloud SQL to, set data or get data from it. And that's going to be happening throughout that service account permission. So we can enable that service account permissions by coming here on the left in the menu and then IAM and admin, and then you will find service accounts here. As I mentioned, normally when we create a project, Google Cloud is going to create a service account, a default service account with the same name of the project using @hubspot.gserviceaccount.com, as you can see it here. So the name of my project is Kevin Blanco-Appsmith. So that's the same name that the service account has. That's the one that is going to be using App Engine. But for real production workloads, I wouldn't recommend from a security standpoint to use the default one. Normally, we create a separate service account that's only going to be having the permissions that it needs, and it's not the default one because Google can give some other permissions to this default one, and that's not good from a security standpoint. But for the sake of this demo, let's use that one. So how do you find App Engine? All you have to do is find it on the search box, and then you will find App Engine. Like I said, it's a managed service. Normally, this should be already enabled because we enable the App Engine Service Account API. But if you don't see it, you should see a button that says here, create, and you should be able to create your service account instance. Also, if you need to know some information about your service account instance, which is going to be important for us, you can do that by typing gcloud app describe, and that will give us some information about our App Engine instance. For example, one key data that you're going to need is the location where this is hosted. In this case, for me, it's in the US Central region. This is important because we want to host or run the other services in this same region, obviously for networking velocity and stuff like that and permissions. So the Cloud SQL Database on the same region, the Cloud Bucket on the same region, because again, for speed and simplicity. So there you go, we have our permissions and App Engine ready to execute. Now, turns out, like I mentioned, we need to give that API, service account, some permissions to be able to write to the database, write to the Cloud Bucket, and do other things. So the way you do that, it's manually. Again, you can go and find that service account, or very easily do that on the command line interface. So the command that does that is, let me clear our terminal here so we can see which one it's going to be. The name of the command is gcloud projects @AAM policy binding, and then the name of your project. In this case, the name of my project is Kevin Blanco.appsmith, and then the member, that's the first flag we're going to pass, which is the service account that we want to give some permissions. And last, which role are we going to be giving to this service account in this project? So we're going to be giving the Cloud SQL editor to this service account in this project. So there you go. So we're going to be doing this same to give Cloud SQL editor, Cloud SQL admin, object admin, App Engine Deployer, and Login Admin. Again, you can find all of these commands in the blog, and also I'm going to speed up this because again, this is very straightforward. So that's it, we're ready in terms of permissions. We just gave our service account Cloud SQL client permissions, editor, storage object admin, App Engine Deployer, and Login Admin. So our App Engine permissions and also APIs are now ready and good to go. Let's create our database. We can find our database by typing SQL here on the top, and we will see the Cloud SQL service. Now, Cloud SQL can run multiple types of databases like Postgres, like MySQL, etc. So let's create one instance with our free trial. We're going to be selecting Postgres SQL. So let's choose Postgres SQL, and we're going to need some information here. The first thing is going to be our instance ID. I'm going to call it Strapi. Then I'm going to generate a password that is automatically generated by Google because it has good, a good strength. Let me copy that because we're going to need it. So make sure to copy that somewhere else. Then we're going to select the version of the database we're going to be using. Postgres 15 should be good. Postgres 14 works, Postgres 13 works. I've tried all of those and it works with Strapi. Now, which edition we're going to be choosing, the Enterprise Plus or the Enterprise? Obviously, for production workloads, I will definitely recommend the Enterprise Plus because the service level agreement and other high performance machines. But for this demo, we're going to choose Enterprise, and actually I have some production workloads using Enterprise and it works fine. Also, we can find some preset. I'm going to select Sandbox because I don't want to spend a lot of money on this right now because it's testing purposes. But again, for production, I will definitely recommend a production configuration. Then let's see our region. Remember, we talked about the region when we were creating our App Engine app. Okay, we're going to be using US Central 1 because it's the same region as the App Engine. We can also define the zonal availability. For production workloads, I will definitely select multiple zones because the database is a key portion of our diagram. But for this one, I'm going to be selecting single zone. Then we can show other options, for example, the machine configuration, storage, connection. For storage, I'm going to be obviously using SSD, but if you want to lower the cost for a sandbox or for a testing environment, HDD also works fine. Also, the amount of capacity, 10 gigabytes for this one. For testing is fine, but for production, you have to make sure that you understand how much data we're going to have, and you have to select the right amount of size. Also, you can enable automatic storing increases in case your project grows to a point that you didn't thought about. Google Cloud can automatically increase the storage. I'm going to turn it off for this one. And then you can enable other permissions like the connections, the data protection. If you want to have automatically backups, enable point-in recovery time. This is definitely needed for production workloads. But for the sake of this demo, I'm going to leave it as it is. So you can have a breakdown of the costs per day and per hour estimated for this instance, and also a summary of everything we just talked about here. So we can create our instance, and that's going to take some minutes to happen. Also, again, you can do everything we just mentioned in the command line interface without having to go through all of those steps. Again, just go to the Cloud Shell, and then you will run the gcloud SQL instance create command. And you can find that also in the article in the description. And the structure is something like this that we see right here. It's pretty much the same parameters we just passed, but in the command line interface. All right, the database creation is done, and you can see that by this checkbox right here. Let me close for now the command line interface, and you can see some information about the database on the left. For example, the users. And one thing to note is that normally the default username for Cloud SQL is Postgres. Remember this because we're going to be needing this for the connection from Strapi. Also, on a Cloud SQL instance, we can have more than just one database, which is very interesting. So by default, the name of the database is going to be as well Postgres. So remember, username Postgres, database Postgres, the password we created at the beginning, and also in the overview page, you will find the connection name. This connection name is going to be used to connect from Strapi. Normally, the structure is project name, then the region, then the name of the instance. That's all the data we're going to need to connect in the following video from Strapi to this database. So now let's do the final portion, which is Cloud SQL storage. Cloud storage. So let's go to the storage section, Cloud Storage, and here we can manage all of the different buckets we want to use. Let me close this, and let's create a new bucket storage. By default, normally we will see that App Engine creates some storage buckets here. I will recommend not to touch those, so let's create a new one. Let's first create the name. I'm going to call it Strapi-Kevin-CMS GCP. The name of the buckets have to be unique, so and globally unique. So if you have to define a specific name that works for you. Now, where to store the data is going to be multi-region, dual region, or just one single region. For production workloads, I will recommend at least dual region or multi-region if your bucket, allows it. But I'm going to be choosing region for the sake of this demo, and the same region as we had, remember, the database and App Engine, which is US Central 1. Then the storage class. Now, there might be an option where you want to define auto class, but for this demo is standard because we're going to be accessing the data in short terms, both reading and writing. Nearline, call line, and archive are other types of cloud storage that you want to explore for other stuff, but not for a API or a CMS, which is what we're doing right now. So let's continue to the other step. You want to enforce the access to this object to be public or not. In my case, since I'm going to be building an API, I do want the objects, which is going to be mostly images and files, to be accessible on the web because I'm going to be exposing these APIs from Strapi to a frontend. And normally I want to access those URLs, images and PDF. But also there are other mechanisms. I've worked in projects that are purely internal, and we have to do is create signed objects, which also works, or use authentication, for example, using Identity Aware Proxy and other services. Now, for this demo, I'm going to be doing completely public files. So I'm going to remove this enforced public access prevention and also the access control. This definitely works. I mean, Strapi supports both uniform and fine-grained, but I normally enjoy more fine-grained. Some projects might enforce uniform. Both works from a Strapi standpoint, so that's great. And then data protection, if we want to, for example, have object versioning, Strapi also supports this with no problem. And retention for compliance, so nobody deletes files in here in certain amount of time. Now you can enable this for production. I will definitely recommend having retention for compliance, but for this specific demo, I won't. So let's create our bucket. Cool, now that the bucket is ready, let's configure some permissions. The first one is how do we give access to the public files? How do we make the files on this bucket public? We can do that manually, but also let's do it on the cloud gcloud command line interface. And the way we do that is using the gsutil command. In this case, we're going to be using the gcloud command, but the gsutil command. We're going to change the ACL policy into this bucket that we have here. This is the name of the bucket. Remember, that's the name we gave to all users to be able to read, only read. So when we execute this, basically any file that we create in this bucket, the URL of this is going to be completely public and anyone can access it. Just reading, obviously not writing. So that's great. And the other thing is we need to give access to the App Engine service account to be able to write objects here. Now in theory we just did it, and we can see that by going to the permissions, and we should be able to see that in this case Kevin Blanco AppSmith AppSpot service account, which is the default service account, does have permissions to be a storage object admin. So we're definitely great to go. So you're now equipped with everything you need to have in Google Cloud Platform to run Strapi. Go to the second part and subscribe to my channel for more tutorials like this. See you on the next video.